Everybody, welcome to another video, and today it is the 18th of December. Today we'll be talking about the general frontline updates, and that's starting off with the frontline around the city of Donetsk and also the situation around Bakhmut. And so let's start out with what's going on around Donetsk, where in the past few weeks we've seen an uptick in shelling in Donetsk city, especially in the center of Donetsk, where you have a lot of notable universities, hospitals, football stadiums, stuff like that. So we've seen, especially today, some pretty heavy shelling of this area. A lot of this is coming from Avdiivka, especially some of the artillery batteries that are to the south of Avdiivka. Also, some of them that are in some open fields around Orlivka over here. Of course, you also have some that is coming from the area around Marinka, which is where I want to focus on a lot during this video. Also, of course, you have Krasnohorivka, and as I have stated numerous times before, you have the town of Novelske, which is one of the main staging grounds, one of the forward artillery posts for the Ukrainians for spotting and for launching these shorter range artillery strikes onto Donetsk city, especially on the city center. You can see that this is a pretty good position to place artillery in, and it overlooks the city of Donetsk. But moving on to Marinka, where we actually have battles going on right now, I want to talk about the situation here. And so we've received news from pro-Russia, but also some pro-Ukrainian sources in this regard, that Russia has been able to advance a little bit in the southern sector of the Battle of Marinka. So going into specifics, we have some geolocated footage showing that Russian tanks were able to clear out some of the different residential blocks in this area. And so the main street in the southern part of Marinka is called Zavodskaya Street. I think it's just you could see it's just like in a branch artery of Druzhby Avenue, and it goes out, connects with the agricultural enterprise, with the local kindergarten. It's also near the local secondary school, where you have this this soccer stadium. And so you can see that this entire area is pretty dense. There are some 5-story buildings in this area, so Ukraine basically used every single one of these apartment buildings to entrench themselves in. They also had a lot of different communications and fortifications within the basements of these apartment buildings, which also slowed down the process. And so you had the Russian tanks being sent in, and they push through, and they've been able to secure some minor gains in the sector, and they've basically reached Druzhby Avenue at this point, although there is a bit of a gray zone in between their positions taken around Zavodskaya Street and Druzhby Avenue itself. Now, once they take Druzhby Avenue, they would probably want to go and attack the agricultural enterprise over here, because you do have the 2nd Battalion, 2nd Air Assault Battalion of the 79th Air Assault Brigade fortified in this area. And by taking out this fortified position in the southern part of the town, they would have a good position to flank the main Ukrainian grouping in the center of the town, which is still centered around Druzhby Avenue, because Ukraine still has positions all along Druzhby Avenue. A lot of pro-Russia sources have alleged that most or all of Marinka has fallen today, but this is far from the truth. Ukraine still has fortified positions even to the east of Druzhby Avenue, around the administrative building, around the police precinct, and even on Oktyabrskaya Street. Even in the frozen products factory, we had news from pro-Russia sources that this was being shelled by Russia. So this is not even under Russian control anymore, but they are actively assaulting it, and so we'll probably trade hands in the next few days. And so, yeah, you do have a lot of entrenched Ukrainian positions in this area, but they are slowly being overrun, as we saw in the southern part of Marinka. Now, moving a bit further to the south, we have news that the Russians attacked the town of Pobieda. And so in this area, we haven't really received a lot of news in recent months, but it seems as if they're trying to launch a renewed assault in this direction onto the agricultural enterprise on the outskirts of Pobieda and then on the town itself. It is a very small town, but you can see that it's located in a strategic position, because it is located in the just in between the cities of Marinka And I think if you zoom out, it leads onto the highway connecting to Soledar, and before Soledar, it connects to Klishchiivka, also connects to Pavlivka. So yeah, it is located in a pretty important position for just the logistical situation for Ukraine, making it more cohesive. And so taking it would be very good to both the situation in Pavlivka, but also for the situation in Marinka for the Russians. And so now we're receiving reports from the Russian side that the Ahmad Zapad division, which is one of the Chechen units, and also the Bars 11 volunteer unit are actively attacking Pobieda. So we'll see if anything comes of that. But for now, Ukraine still holds positions in this agricultural enterprise, this warehouse, and then in the town itself, which is actually very small. And we had news from pro-Russia sources, actually. I read this on Rybar, that the Ukrainians were able to push back the Russians in this certain sector of the front line, which is to the southeast of Pobieda. This was not just mentioned by Rybar, it was also mentioned by some local Russian Telegram channels that talked about some failures to the south of Marinka, so they were probably alluding to this sector of the front line. So they were saying that around Novomykhailivka, basically, the Russians were forced to withdraw from some of their trench lines that they had fortified and contested really for many months. And so this was probably in the general vicinity of just this area, because you do see several strong points over here of the Russian line that could have theoretically been overrun. So you can see, for instance, this forest belt over here, Ukraine probably took it back based on these reports. You also saw on the Rybar map that Ukraine had some gains in this area. Even this field over here could have probably been taken back by the Ukrainians, although we're not exactly sure. Also, they probably overran some of the trench lines over here per Rybar's map, which showed Ukrainian gains, because there really is just a trench line at every single hedgerow at this point. But let's move on now to the situation in the Bakhmut direction, where I did update the map to show that the Russians have made some minimal gains just to the northeast of Klishchiivka. So there were reports from pro-Russia side that the Wagner group was able to take over the train station at Klishchiivka. So the train station, if you zoom in, it's located over here, but there's no confirmation of this yet. What we do know is that the Russians have been able to take this very localized hill, this pretty small hill, just to the east, sort of northeast of the train station, and so now they have fire control over the train station. They've also reached the rail line at this point over here, and they cut off the road supplying Klishchiivka from southern Bakhmut. And so they have made some gains in the sector over the past few days, and they now have fire control over a very important position. They can use snipers or like mortars or whatever to attack the Ukrainian positions within Klishchiivka, which, according to these same pro-Russian sources, are very heavily fortified. They're saying that basically every single house has been turned into a fortress. They're using these concrete dugouts, and they have firing positions in basically every house. And so clearing Klishchiivka out is going to be a pretty difficult task, which is why you could see that the Wagner group isn't even attacking it head-on, despite the fact that they are pretty close to the town. They have positions in some of these areas just to the east of Klishchiivka. They could theoretically launch frontal assaults using the various different roads and paths leading into the town, but we haven't really seen that happening because they understand that Ukraine is very fortified in this area. So you could see that they're having this minor envelopment by going and trying to flank from the northeast. So you could see another push to this area over here, to the rail line again, and then to this road over here, which is something that would really be in lockstep with previous Russian strategies of just cutting off supply lines, making cauldrons, very small cauldrons, in fact, and then just advancing from there. And in this report from the Russian side, they mentioned the units of the 71st Jaeger Brigade and the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. So I'm not implying that the entire brigade is in here, because at least in the case of the 71st Jaeger Brigade, they have units in the Bakhmutivka district and in Pirorodny. I really wish, though, that we would have more specific information on the battalions that were fighting in each specific battle on the front lines. So I always have to constantly change the location of these units just based on the latest report that comes out. But it's not entirely accurate because it sort of implies that the entire military is based from this town, when that's obviously not true. So just don't get confused by that. Now, let's move on to the situation in Opytne, where we haven't really had that many updates since the latest Russian gains in this area, where they were able to take over the local hospital, the local gas station, the local school, music school, which was a very fortified Ukrainian position. Ever since then, the Ukrainians have been putting up a very strong fight with they've been using the 54th Mechanized Brigade and the 53rd Mechanized Brigade in this area. There's a geolocated video of Ukrainian positions in Opytne, very similar to Klishchiivka and Marinka. They have a lot of extensive fortifications in these larger houses that you can see over here. These houses, I'm not sure if they're 5 stories. They look maybe like 3 stories, something like that. But you can see that they are pretty large in comparison with these other houses over here, the smaller ones. And so they are used as fortified positions by the Ukrainians to hold back the Russians at key points, sort of creating bottlenecks for them as their fighting vehicles and their tanks advance along the road. And so then they have to be cleared out, and that could be a very methodical process that takes a while, especially if the Russians want to minimize casualties, given the fact that they've been fighting in this area and have harsh conditions and trench warfare in many sectors. And so they would want to reduce their casualties in the urban fighting, where the sort of military-related deaths would be the highest. And so that's undeniably slowed down the Wagner Group's advance over here, which is why we haven't really seen many changes since the last updates from Bakhmut. Some Ukrainian sources are alleging, though, that they have been able to conduct a counterattack and push back the Russians a few kilometers. Now, I saw zero proof of this, absolutely zero, but I'm just going to say what they were alleging for the sake of just throwing it out there to see what they were claiming, because I also give information about what pro-Russia sources claim. They basically say that they recaptured the garbage dump. This is plausible. Even I have it marked under Ukrainian control on this map. But then they say that they were able to take over control of a lot of the residential blocks that were previously taken over by the Russians. They were able to regain some of their lost positions in the area, the industrial area. I'm not sure to the full extent of which factories they claimed were under their control, but we did see that some of these sources were alleging that they were able to advance deeper into Patrice Lumumba Street and contest the industrial area. And so this is not true. The Russians have not really retreated at any point along the front line besides the garbage dump, where they retreated from those positions, where, yeah, those are some pretty good positions, honestly, but they are, the fact that Ukraine has fought for it and taken it back shows how important it is, and that they're really just fighting tooth and nail for each single square meter of land, honestly. But again, I want to stress that there's zero proof that the Ukrainians have conducted this sort of counterattack over here. Just think of it like this: the Russians, they've been advancing in the sector. It took them months to even reach these positions, and then Ukraine would somehow be able to take it all back in a single day. It just doesn't seem to be that logical. But anyway, let's move on to the situation in Soledar, where we did have some minor changes to the map. We had reports of renewed fighting, but honestly, I couldn't even change anything on the map because all the changes that I saw were things that I already marked under Russian control, so I'm not even sure how true these reports are. I just heard reports that the LPR and Russian troops are trying to renew attacks in the area north of the Nav plant, which they took back in September, I believe, and then that they just expended some of their control over this hotel and some of these different residential blocks to the north of this quarry over here. But that's really it. The defense that the Ukrainians have put up, specifically in Soledar, has really been crazy, given the fact that once the Nav plane fell and the quarry fell, really it looked like they were going to have to retreat all the way up north of the salt mine. But really they were able to put the Russians back, hold them back for many months, and even now the Russians have still not been able to make any frontal assaults on the city, and they're having to try to flank around Yakovlivka. And now the Ukrainian sources, they say they finally admitted that Yakovlivka has fallen to the Russians, and they're saying now that they're building new lines of defense to the north. This is probably centered around Vesele, where they're going to try to fortify themselves in anticipation for the battles that are going to go on there. And they're also trying to be proactive, the Ukrainians, and perhaps the 118th Cherkasy Defense Brigade is involved in this. But they are launching some counterattacks towards Bilohorivka. This one over here, not the northern one. They've launched some different assaults with their military fighting vehicles, their columns in these forest belts around this train line over here from the north towards the town of Bilohorivka, which again implies that it is under Russian control if the Ukrainians are the ones trying to attack into the city of or the town of Bilohorivka itself. Now, we don't know about the specific success of the Ukrainians in Bilohorivka, but this does imply that they are aiming to take control of it in order to secure at least one of their flanks to make sure that they can't be enveloped by a joint assault from the Russians on Vesele, from Yakovlivka and Bilohorivka in tandem. So that's really it for the frontline situation between Ukraine and Russia in the Donetsk front. So thank you all for watching. See you guys later. Bye-bye.